Joining me today is Susan Stuebner, the president of Colby Sawyer College. So Susan, because we focus on politics and just not sort of the wonderful community involvement, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the intersection of higher ed and sort of the political arena.
Sure.
And not specific to Colby Sawyer, but sort of as a president, as somebody who's had a number of senior roles in higher education.
Sure.
And has thought about this, I imagine. Is the regulatory environment helpful? It's both. To what degree is it helpful? To what degree is it burdensome to higher education?
I think, John, I think one of the things that's helpful is that institutional accountability. I think it's, we all receive a significant amount of federal aid through primarily the financial aid for our students. And so I think the accountability piece is very good. We've certainly seen some proliferation of the for-profit or online programs where that accountability has been key to really assessing the quality of their programs. On the other hand, as a small institution or in small private ed, higher ed in general, we often have offices of one or two, and so a number of the regulations, whether it's related to financial aid or the White House scorecard or the Affordable Care Act, there have been a number of new regulations that have taken a lot of time in some of our offices. Human Resources is one in particular where they're spending a lot more time on regulations than being able to do some of the professional development and training that would be ideal for a small workforce like us.
You list a couple of regulations, the Affordable Care Act. I mean, that's something that wasn't around 10 years ago. Right. The other regulatory environments, that must put a huge burden on just trying to keep the cost of education down. Ironically,
yes.
Some of this is designed to sort of keep the cost down.
Right.
Is there a catch-22 there? Or?
I think there is a catch-22. Again, as smaller institutions that I'm most familiar with, I think, the challenge we face is larger institutions can probably add personnel. At our institutions, what's happening is some of those regulations are just taking away the time for our folks to do some of the things that might benefit the institution or the students more.
So I want to also talk about sort of the cost side
Sure.
of it. A lot of what I see in the media is designed to sort of deflect the long-term increases in higher ed. And there's no question that CPI in higher ed, as well as CPI in healthcare, have gone up faster than the inflation in general.
Right.
How do colleges over time, how will they control their costs?
I think we're actually doing a fairly decent job of controlling our costs. I think the whole cost structure in terms of our pricing model, it's very confusing. And unfortunately, it's one that's very hard to step away from on the private side. We have a high price, high discount model. The average discount in private four-year institutions is 50% these days.
So if you're going to a private school, wherever you are, there's a shot that you're getting between 40 and 60%
exactly.
Tuition discount.
It's the average these days. And the schools that have tried to go away from that model have seen drastic declines in enrollment. And it's really a psychology. There's a high price, high value psychology, and there's also the merit aid that we award. Families feel pride for that. So it's a real conundrum, but at the same time, I think you're right, we as institutions, we do have to work very hard to keep our costs as low as possible.
So I know there have been, economists might say, well, why don't you just lower the price and lower the discount?
Right.
But the psychologist in you must say, wait, there's more factors at play here.
I mean, one of the amazing things at all the institutions where I've been in the last 10 to 15 years is that there are families who will actually, the net cost will be lower to go to my institution, but because an institution has a higher price and their merit award is higher amount, even if the overall cash out of pocket is less, there's a pride they feel in getting that school values my son or daughter more because you gave them a bigger scholarship. And so it sounds crazy, I know, and it's more complicated than that, but that's a big piece of it. So it's a conundrum.
And not one we're going to solve here.
Right.
But in the next 20 or 30 seconds, if you had one piece of advice for the next governor of New Hampshire, what would it be?
Oh gosh. I think there's been a good spotlight on education in general, and I would anything that he or she can do to continue our young people to stay in state would be great.
Okay, super. With that, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Capital Connections, your weekly access to politics and policy along the I-89 and I-91 corridors and how it impacts your life in our region. If you've got a comment or an idea for a future show, please send me an email. And more importantly, please join us again next week at the same time for another edition of Capital Connections.